We've all heard about the impeachment process against Donald Trump. However, how many really understand what this means, what impeachment actually consists of, and the history of this process in the United States? I can already tell you that this process is much more complex than a mere debate about the president's impeachment. You see, the American Constitution defines impeachment as a tool to be used only in extremely exceptional cases. With it, the legislative power can practically reverse the people's will, a will expressed through the election of the president. Therefore, under very serious circumstances, an impeachment implies the overriding of the democratically elected regime. We're talking about a process designed for cases in which the president has committed serious crimes that must be clearly demonstrated after a thorough prior investigation by the House of Representatives. Mainly, those crimes include cases of treason, bribery, and other serious unspecified crimes. However, even with this explanation, we still need more information to be able to fully understand how impeachment works. That's why in this video, we're not only going to talk about the curious process, we're also going to take a look at its history and talk about past cases of impeachment in the United States. We're going to look at the circumstances that caused them and their outcomes. And yes, why not? We'll also do a roundup on the impeachment that the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, is facing.
Impeachment, a key counterweight.
Something good about American democracy is that it was designed specifically to limit the power of politicians. You see, the curious thing about the United States is that both the Constitution and the US Bill of Rights are limiting. This means that if you read the US Constitution, you'll soon realize that what it truly says helps prevent the state, or the people who control the state, from exercising excessive power over the rest of the citizens. This strongly differentiates it from most of the world's constitutions, which focus on defining the rights and obligations of the people. And this is fundamental. It's essential for understanding the meaning of impeachment in the US. Allow me to explain. The Founding Fathers established the possibility of dismissing the president and other senior officials from the very beginning. They defined the process as a political instead of a criminal trial. That way, the president could be removed from his functions due to serious crimes without any judge ruling for or against him at any moment in the process. In fact, the only judge present during the entire impeachment process is the president of the Supreme Court, who's responsible for overseeing the operation of the political trial once it passes to the Senate. But the sentence, in this case dismissal, is decided solely and exclusively by the senators. But you might be thinking, well, hang on, if this is a political process, then it could be used against any president who the opposition simply doesn't like, right? Well, the truth is, no. In practice, that isn't possible in the North American system. To prevent the process being abused, a series of complicated steps were established to not only guarantee the completion of a justified impeachment process, but also to limit the number of cases beginning. So much so that to this date, in the almost 250 years of United States history, not a single effective impeachment has yet occurred. Not even once. Moreover, in that entire time, only 2 processes have been started. Well, 3 if you take the current one against Donald Trump into account. 3 in the entire history of the country. Now, how exactly does this process work, and what are the steps that lead to dismissal? Well, first there needs to be a reason, evidence that the president was involved in one of the crimes mentioned in the Constitution. With this, any member of the House of Representatives can propose an impeachment or political trial under oath. In Trump's case, it was the president of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi. Then, the committees responsible for investigating the case and determining the facts attributable to the impeachment are designated. Finally, these committees write one or several articles that are voted for individually or jointly by the House of Representatives. This step is equivalent to presenting charges against the president. To understand this better, the House of Representatives' mission in this case is to present charges. If it does, the impeachment or political judgment truly begins, and the entire process is transferred to the Senate, which plays the main role in this entire story. So, in fact, it's actually there in the Senate where the political trial takes place. In this way, the Senate acts as a court. But instead of judges, prosecutors, and jurors, the members of the House of Representatives act as prosecutors and the senators as jurors. So if the senators vote in favor of dismissal with a 2/3 majority, this is equivalent to a jury convicting the accused in a normal trial. A successful impeachment means nothing other than the automatic removal of the president and the transfer of his powers to the vice president. It seems a bit complicated, but really, it's all rather logical. Think about it for a moment. It has to be a very stringent process so that a president can't be dismissed impulsively, like someone grabbing a bargain on Black Friday. But now that we know how it works, the next big question is what can we learn from the history of political trials in the United States? As we told you earlier, besides Trump, there are only 2 more cases to examine, those of Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. And in the case of Richard Nixon, well, his presidency actually ended with a premature resignation, and despite what is commonly thought, the impeachment process was never actually started. So let's learn a little bit more about what happened in those cases.
2 impeachments, 1 resignation, and 0 removals.
The history of political trials in the United States is short, really short. Only 2 presidents have been submitted to them, and neither one was dismissed. Perhaps the least known case is that of Andrew Johnson. And it's not surprising because we're talking about a man who was president between 1865 and 1869. But, well, what did this man do that ended up with him being judged by the American Senate? Well, after President Lincoln's assassination in 1865, Johnson, who was his vice president, became president. After he took command, his policies moved far, far away from Lincoln's. To give you an idea, Johnson was both a member of the Democratic Party and also a massive racist. He is someone who would make Trump look like a poster boy for multiculturalism and diversity. Yep, Andrew Johnson strongly defended the slavery of African Americans and dedicated himself to vetoing each and every one of the bills that Congress had passed to recognize the rights of freed slaves. He also began pardoning generals of the Confederate States of America, who were the ones who had rebelled against the United States by starting the Civil War. Those states, the states that rebelled, considered Lincoln a threat to white supremacy, and they strongly opposed his plan to abolish slavery throughout the country. This really did not sit well with them. And you also have to remember that some of these states had a slave population of 49%. But if his actions already seem serious, wait till I tell you about the final straw. Johnson had the brilliant idea of personally firing and appointing secretaries for his own government, bypassing Congress's validation, which, as you can imagine, is not legal. So now you can get an idea of just how complicated it is to dismiss a president when, despite all of these incredibly serious accusations, Johnson was saved by just 1 vote in the Senate. This single vote prevented them from reaching the necessary 2/3 majority. He was barely saved, but he was saved all the same. In fact, this is by far the closest a US president has ever come to being dismissed. The next attempt came with Richard Nixon more than a century later after the infamous Watergate scandal in 1972, which I'm sure you've all heard about. To refresh your memory, though, the Watergate case was a scandal that involved the president and several CIA agents who were spying on the Democratic Party. They raided Democratic Party headquarters and tapped calls to gain an advantage in Nixon's re-election as president. Later, during the investigation, it was discovered that this illegal eavesdropping had been controlled directly by the White House. This news triggered calls for an impeachment process against the president in 1972. In fact, the thing got so serious that literally everyone turned their backs on Nixon. And because he didn't want the investigation to proceed, in case dirtier issues came up, because let's face it, Nixon was a rather shady president, after 7 months of deliberations, he resigned the day before the House of Representatives were to vote on the process. 1 day before. So the truth is that the impeachment mechanism was never launched in Nixon's case.
I believe the time has come to bring that investigation and the other investigations of this matter to an end.
But it was launched against Clinton. Bill Clinton, he really messed up. I'm sure many of you have heard the name Monica Lewinsky. The end of the 1990s, the affair, the slip, the extramarital meetings between the then intern Monica Lewinsky and Bill Common, well, they were common knowledge in Washington, and his wife Hillary knew nothing about it. But don't be mistaken, the reason why an impeachment process was started against Bill Clinton didn't have anything to do with the president being unfaithful to his wife. Not at all. The real reason, or at least the reason for which the process was justified, were Clinton's lies, as well as his pressuring of others around him to also lie to hide a sordid story that took place behind the closed doors of the Oval Office.
What I want the American people to know, what I want the Congress to know, is that I am profoundly sorry for all I have done wrong in words and deeds.
And believe me when I tell you that in the United States, at least until Trump arrived, catching a president in a lie and forcing those around him to lie as well wasn't well viewed. Not at all. So now that we've looked at past impeachments and how they work, what about Trump? The truth is, things don't look very good because everything indicates that he's done something very serious. So what exactly are the accusations against Trump, and can this process affect him in 2020?
Trump, Biden, and Ukraine. A juicy plot?
Trump's case started a long way back, and far away as well, more specifically in Ukraine. What on earth does Trump have to do with Ukraine, and why is Joe Biden in this section's title? Well, the truth is that this is none other than the latest chapter in the often absurdist Trump presidency. Basically, everything indicates that Trump asked the new Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, directly by phone to investigate Biden and his relation with the gas company Burisma, in which Hunter Biden, the son of Joe Biden, who was Barack Obama's former vice president and one of the future Democratic candidates for the White House, was a board member. Shortly before this call, Trump froze almost $400 million in military aid to Ukraine, apparently as a pressure method. This could be considered a bribe in exchange for a favor, a quid pro quo. But it doesn't end there. Even the US ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, acknowledged being pressured by Trump to force the Ukrainian government to investigate a supposed theory that Ukraine would have interfered with the 2016 American presidential elections. And no, this time it wasn't to favor Trump, which Russia is accused of having done, but to favor Hillary. And you can imagine how Ukraine's investigations are handled, especially if they're done under pressure from Washington. In other words, Trump seems to be using the US government's means and resources to pressure governments from foreign countries that have more than a questionable rule of law to dig up dirt against his opponents. It's pretty unbelievable stuff. Given the seriousness of these claims, Congress decided to open an impeachment process to thoroughly investigate this entire matter and figure out if President Trump bribed the Ukrainians to gain campaign data. And it doesn't end there. Apparently, Trump created a kind of parallel diplomacy with Ukraine which lay outside the institutional channels. He used his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, even forcing Gordon Sondland to answer to him. So, is this enough to kick out the president? Well, we don't know, but what we do know is that information keeps being uncovered, further complicating Trump's situation. Information like this.
New documents reveal details of Pompeo's role in Ukraine affair. Emails and documents released by the State Department support testimony showing Secretary of State Mike Pompeo enabled the Ukrainian pressure campaign at the center of the impeachment proceedings. According to testimony in the impeachment query, Ukrainian diplomats in Washington knew there was a problem with aid as early as July 25th, the day Mr. Trump spoke with the Ukrainian president by phone and asked him to investigate his rivals.
The truth is that for the time being, the Republican Party doesn't want to turn its back on the president under the current accusations, especially when the elections are so close. All of this could change, however, if what is known in the United States as a smoking gun is unleashed. That is, if information that could bring down the president and that is 100% proven, demonstrated, and explosive is revealed. But until that happens, and if it happens, it's normal for the Republicans to support Trump in order to hold on to the presidency. Also, remember that in the Senate, which is where the impeachment is decided, Republicans hold a majority. As it stands, the Democrats' only hope would be to find flagrant evidence that Trump really bribed the Ukrainian authorities to do all that is claimed. Undoubtedly, this is quite the drama, and we'll be watching to see how this mess develops. But now it's your turn. After knowing how impeachment works, how past cases happened, and why they happened, do you think Trump could be dismissed, or will this process end up as just another failed case? And what do you think of the political trial process as a counterweight to the president's power? Well, leave your answer in the comments below, and I really do hope you enjoyed this video. Please do hit that like button if you did, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos. Also, please do check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. Also, this channel is possible because of Patreon and our patrons on that platform. Please do consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.
What I want the American people to know, what I want the Congress to know, is that I am profoundly sorry for all I have done wrong in words and deeds.